Hi, this is Lippy. I'm a shamanic healer, and this is part of my series of videos on healing journeys, shamanic journeys that I have taken. And to quickly take you through what a shamanic journey means, the technical term means going into non ordinary reality to gain information, insight, and understanding about this reality. And the journeys that I speak of in these video series are about not only journeys that I've taken in non ordinary reality, but also journeys that I have taken in this reality. Because to me, although technically a journey taken in this reality would not classify as a shamanic journey, to me it is also a learning and insightful experience. And quite often when you take a journey in non-ordinary reality and gain some insight and experience, it leads to a similar journey in the external world. And this particular journey was about my experience with emotional wounds. I have made a few videos about emotional wounds, which I'll paste copy paste link below in the comments. And these videos tell you a little bit more about what emotional wounds are, how to know if you have them, and what they may look like energetically. But in today's video, I'd like to focus on a very interesting discovery that I made in my journey with wounds, with emotional wounds, and that is the presence of something that I have now named existential wounds. And before we go there, I'd like to share with you about how this journey began. And for me, it began when I first came across the words emotional wounds in this book called How to Find Your Own North Star by Beck. And I'm gonna paste that down below in the comment section as well, because by the way, I absolutely love Beck, and she to me is one of the best life coaches alive in the world today. And her work has had a very big influence on me. And in this book, How to Find Your Own North Star, she actually described types of emotional wounds and how they occur in quite a bit of interesting detail. And that was the first time I sort of came across the concept. And then that was followed by reading this amazing book, which I'm also going to copy paste down below in the link. And this book was called Stepping Out of Fear by a gentleman called Krishnananda. That's his sannyasi name. It's an Osho sannyasi. And I think his real name is it Tom Strobe? Sorry, I'm very bad with names. I think it's Tom Strobe, but if I got that wrong, please excuse me. And in this book, this is one, by the way, again, one of the best books I've ever read. And if you want to learn about emotional wounds and the kind of emotional wounds that you may be carrying in your psyche, this possibly is one of the best books out there on the subject. And in this book, Tom Strobe or Krishnananda talks about 9 wounds, which include abandonment, engulfment, anger, mistrust, shock, emptiness and neediness, fear, shame and guilt, the pusher judge, and the infections. And he talks about how all of us have a certain degree of these 9 wounds. Now, in my journey, I found as I went further that there were more than 9 wounds. There were actually many different types of wounds, and they actually had a particular quality and a particular nuance. And I also learned a lot about how they affected your life, and a lot of that material is covered in my other videos about emotional wounds, so you can watch those videos if you need more information. But the main point of this video is what I discovered much deeper into that journey about existential wounds. And this is a term I have been using. I can't say I don't know if I've coined the term, but it's a term that I have been using, and it is to describe two types of wounds that, in my experience, do not respond in the long run to any kind of therapy or attempts, if I may use that word, to eradicate them or to heal them or to fix them, which doesn't mean that they're not fixable or they're not healable, just that they keep coming up again and again. Just when you think you've done all the work you need to do to heal these two particular wounds, 6 months down the line, 7 months down the line, something happens and here they are again. So my curiosity was piqued when I kept noticing that, hey, how come these particular wounds come up again and again and again, in spite of all the healing work that I have done on them? Because I notice with wounds like shame and mistrust and anger and many of these other wounds, they, of course, they have various facets to them, but when you work on those facets and you heal those facets, there tends to be a reduction in the intensity of that wound over time. And with these two wounds that I'm going to get into, while the intensity did reduce over time with the work that I did on them, I didn't see them disappear in a larger way, the way other wounds were responding to being worked on, to being healed, to being stitched back together into the fabric of the psyche, etc. So the two wounds that I believe are difficult to heal in any kind of permanent way are difficult to heal because they are existential. They came along with us as a result of our transfer from spirit form, soul form, into the physical realm, the physical body. And my take on this, my theory around this, is that what we are made of is so, the essence of us, the very rarefied energy that is us, is so vast and so unfathomable that when you try to squeeze that energy into a very restrictive earth experience, because the earth experience does have and does carry a lot of limitation with it, you, in the process of doing that, end up with these existential wounds, and they are the wound of being too much and of not being enough. So let's look at them each separately. Now, the wound of not being enough is something we all carry. I think I personally haven't met anyone who doesn't on some level feel that they are enough, unless they're sociopaths and psychopaths. That's enough topic for another video. And again, my experience with this is, okay, so you have all this pop psychology and pop culture around building self-esteem and building self-worth, and then you have all the esoteric and spiritual traditions around this wound and around this general topic. But I've been through a whole bunch of those therapies and wisdoms and treatments in this area, and I found that when something would happen that would trigger this energy, it felt like just going back to square one. It was like, well, yeah, I was feeling great yesterday, I was feeling great for 10 months or 6 months or whatever, and I actually felt for the first time in my life that I was good enough or enough, and now something went and happened, and here I am feeling like crap and feeling like, yeah, I'm just not good enough, and when does this end? And I realized that this is a very difficult wound to handle on a long-term basis, because it's existential. It came along with being part of the earth experience. Because think about taking something as powerful and unfathomable and as vast as our beings, our inner beings, and think about taking that and squeezing that into a very helpless, limited earth body, earth experience. And it's like, you're obviously you're going to feel not good enough, because somewhere some part of you recognizes who you really are and understands the depth of that, and how powerful that is. And you rarely experience that depth and that power and that level of oneness in the human form. And the people that do experience it are actually very few, and the majority of the humans don't experience that. So by default, the process of being all powerful, indestructive, energetic beings being squeezed into helpless little tiny bodies, and especially the experience of being a baby and being a child where you're even more helpless, is going to create that wound of not being good enough, of not being enough. And for me, now the aim is not so much about, okay, how do I fix this wound? How do I feel better more and more of the time? It's about having compassion for our earth experience and having kindness towards the earth experience, and understanding that this is something that came along with the package. Basically, it was the fine print, so to speak. And this is not to sound negative or skeptical or say that you're never going to feel like you're good enough. There are a lot of things you can do to change the energy of that wound and to manage it right. I think it's about managing it right. I think it's about, when we're born, I think that if we have more evolved, more woke family and people around us who understand that coming into this form has caused us a certain amount of wounding, and that wounding is addressed from your early childhood, you're going to end up with less intensity around that wounding, and you probably will not feel less than or less than good enough a lot of the time, unless it gets triggered in some very large way. And even when it does get triggered in a very large way, if it has been handled right, with compassion, with understanding, and with the right support from your early years, it won't stick around. That feeling won't stick around for too long. But most of us haven't had that woke parenting, or that those level of evolved people around us when we were growing up, to be able to address this existential wounding. And therefore, when we grow up, the intensity and the impact of that existential wounding become more intense and very difficult to manage. The second wound, the second existential wound that I have come across, is the wound which is actually the opposite of not feeling good enough, and that's the fear of being too much. And again, this to me is a byproduct of our immense, unfathomable, all-powerful, energetic essences, beings, who we truly are, being squeezed into this limited, very difficult sometimes earth vibration. And this wound, to me, the fear of being too much, it manifests as a fear of hubris, a fear of death, because when we fear being too much, what are we really fearing? We're fearing the void, because being too much is about expanding to a size or a proportion or going in a direction that is the unknown and that has no measure, that has no, the I am, the spiritual I am, that I am that, which is without fathom and without measure. And that is very frightening to a limited human experience, because it's like that pit that you can go on falling into and it has no bottom and you don't know where you're going with that. Or it could be like flying into a space and time that has no beginning and no end, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And it's interesting because the human brain, the human mind, need boundaries to feel safe. And when we try to break our barriers, it creates deep feelings of not being safe within us, because we're trying to somewhere experience, or we will experience, that void, that nothingness, which is where we come from, and which is very frightening to the human mind and the human body. It's fine with our essence, but it's very frightening to the mechanics of being in a human body, if you know what I mean. So this was just me sharing my journey with wounds and existential wounds, and also to let you know that you don't have to worry if you've done a lot of work on your wounds and you find that both these wounds, the fear of being too much or the fear of not being enough, still come up when they're triggered. It's not a sign that your therapy or your modality or whatever is not working, and that's not what it is. I think as I said earlier, we just have to acknowledge that these wounds came along as part of the earth experience, and instead of trying to shape them into something healthy and tolerable, I think we need to get curious about them and use them almost to grow in our spiritual understanding. And of course, I'm not denying that we shouldn't work on healing whatever aspects of them we can heal, and work on integrating them into a more functional whole, if I may call it that. But we don't have to worry and be constantly obsessed with having high self-esteem and perfect self-worth at each and every moment and each and every time, because there may be situations in life which will trigger off these existential wounds, and that's okay. I thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you back soon. I'm trying to make more videos this weekend to make up for the long absence, so I hope to see you back with more videos, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.